All right, hold up again. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Asante Sana, thank you for coming today once again. So just briefly, like Nigerianism on trial is our topic today. As a Nigerian-born individual who's biracial, I take a particular interest in this topic. I think I speak for all of us, or most of us, who are Nigerian, who are not benefited by a lot of the corruption that's running rampant through the country, that there's a particular bit of heartbreak when we see a lot of what's happening in Nigeria as far as the topic of discussion that he's going to introduce us to. So I am looking forward to this. I hope you guys are as well. He's really worked hard on this. Brother Omowale Africa has spent a lot of time researching a lot of information, working on his presentation for a while. I think it was back in May. You said it with a smirk on your face that you were going to be talking about Nigerianism and the colonization of the African mind. So here we are. I present to you Brother Omowale Africa. Put your hands together.
Appreciate you, Sister Wahida. My man just walked in. All right, so I'm going to be building today on a lecture that I've been working on for some time now. The idea initially came to me, I want to say like back in February of this year, being on social media a lot as a means of engaging with young people throughout the diaspora, of connecting. Social media gives you a good insight into the consciousness of our people. So if you spend any time on social media, you'll see a great deal of diaspora wars, a lot of conflict, a lot of chauvinism, a lot of ignorance. So that kind of like piqued my curiosity because I wanted to learn a little bit about Nigeria, because I was reading a book one time from the brother LaRon Bennett Jr. He wrote a book called The Challenge of Blackness. And in the introduction of that book, he says that during the 60s, Black America had more riots and uprisings than were had on the continent altogether. And he said, in fact, if Black America was on the continent, we would have our independence today. So that made me want to look at some of the independent struggles that occurred on the continent. So naturally, the first one that I started to look at was Nigeria. And I was very shocked to find that their independent struggle wasn't really a struggle at all. It was more like a carefully orchestrated, theatrical, political maneuver that the British used to kind of give the view of independence to the Africans in Nigeria, but it wasn't actually independence. And you know, when I look at our own struggle here, I see parallels, you know, with like the integrationist movement and us receiving our like civil rights and thinking that we've arrived or obtained some type of liberation, when the reality is the dynamic is still exactly the same. So kind of like just spoke on what the impetus for my talk was today, but get into the heart of it. It really is about an identity crisis, an identity crisis throughout the diaspora, on the continent. A lot of the conflict that we are currently having as African people is because of our lack of identity. And we exist at a time, we exist in the information age where there's so much information out there, but there's no way to essentially measure the information and understand, what's right knowledge and what isn't. And as a result of, the literacy in our community, a great deal of ignorance, there are things that just pass, through social media, through YouTube, and people take these things as truth, and they are operating from a point of confusion. So it's my hope, which is the way of AI, our organization, is to bring clarity to issues. So it's my hope to bring some clarity to the issue of identity today. My attempt for this lecture was essentially for it to serve as a critical examination of the psychological barriers to African consciousness, because as a Pan-African, I believe that Pan-Africanism will not work if you first don't have African identity. you can't be a Pan-African if you aren't first an African, right? So one of the things that I wanted to do is walk through what I call 7 barriers to African consciousness. And the way that I wanted to do that was by grounding the discussion in 4 historical epochs of the development of Nigeria. So the 4 epochs that I wanted to walk through today were its economic formation, its amalgamation, its independence, and the Civil War. And that really sounded great when I kind of like set out to do this lecture, because like I said, I spent about 6 months reading a lot of material, at least over 5 or 6 books, but 2 of the most important books that I engage with. One is this book here called The Government and Administration of Africa. Frederick Lugard, who I refer as the father of Nigeria, has some great essays in here that really gives you great insight into the mind of the imperialists and what their goals were for the continent. One thing I love about our enemy or our opponent is the fact that they are so thorough and so detailed and so documented that you can never mistake what their intention is for us as a people, because they document it very well. They are very scientific, cold, and calculated. You know, it's like, okay, there's 10 niggas over there. We want to kill 9 of them. Let's do blah, 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 and they out of here. Like, that's the way that they think, but they document it. They are very thorough and scientific. So this was the one. And the other book was from his wife. It's a book called A Tropical Dependency from Flora Shaw. I refer to her as the mother of Nigeria. So I spent a lot of time reading their materials in preparation for this. So just really quick, today's lecture, I'm really only going to focus on this first component, the economic formation of Nigeria, because it wouldn't be fair to you all to try and give you the 8 months of study that I just did in preparation for this lecture. I would shortchange the people of Nigeria by trying to walk through this much detail in a 45 minute to an hour lecture. And I also would shortchange y'all, because I would have to go so fast that y'all would feel like y'all were over inundated with information, and you would walk away from here with your head spinning. So I want everybody to feel like they are satiated. You know, I told the brother yesterday when I was on the show that I prepared a really good meal, like with you all in mind. So I hope that y'all brought y'all appetite. So before I get into like the first course of today's dinner that I'm having with the family, I just want to give y'all some insight into each of the 7 barriers, and then I'll get started with the talk. The way that the talk is going to go is essentially, I'm going to give y'all some insight on Nigeria today. Then I'll give you the 4 key takeaways that I want you, actually the 3 key takeaways that I want you to walk away from today's lecture with. And then I'll spend a little bit of time on the economic formation of Nigeria, which I broke down into 3 sections. The first section is maps, names, and geography. The second section is British colonial dominance. And the third is the one that I really, really want to engage in. But if I don't have time, maybe somebody can ask me a question during Q&A, and I'll address it that way. But the third is that of the Islamic slave trade. And I feel that it's impossible to talk about the economic formation of Nigeria without getting into the role that slavery played as an economic institution in reshaping Africa. The reality is that most of us who were enslaved and brought here to the West, whether your ancestors were Fan, Wolof, Igbo, Congo, Iwe, Yoruba, like we were enslaved and brought here for the fact that we were considered pagan. Essentially, we weren't Muslim and we weren't Christian, so we were fair game for enslavement. So I would like to talk about that, but if I'm not able to get into it, maybe I can give y'all some game on that during the Q&A. So Nigerianism. Nigerianism, or micronationalism, it is essentially the practice of us tying our identities to the folks who enslaved us, right? So as Black Americans, we tie our identity to the bastards of the British who broke away from the British Empire. So we start our history at 1611, even though there were Africans who were brought to this country as early as 1526, and they revolted and ran to the hills and started the first Maroon communities here in America. They did that down in South Carolina in what's known as Geechee land, right, where the Gullah Geechee people are. But we don't talk about those people. We don't start our history with those people because we tie our history to the American empire. So we say 1619. Another reason why we do that is because we try to hold on to the biblical thesis. We really want to hold hard onto this 400 years in Israel and we came out of there. So we try to hold on to that 1619 because it fits very well with 2019. So that's essentially Nigerianism. Progressive liberalism is, and another term for it is basically neocolonialism. Barack Obama just went to South Africa recently to kick off the Global Citizen campaign. He spoke at Nelson Mandela's the centennial for Nelson Mandela, and he was very open and honest about what his aims and objectives were for progressive liberalism for the continent. He talked about the need for things like universal humanity, universal basic income, universal, he talked, opening the continent up to things like homosexuality and all these things. But I want to read here to drive home the point of progressive liberalism. There's an excerpt in here. This is Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah. And he has a quick section. It'll take me like 83 seconds to read it, but if y'all bear with me, y'all will appreciate it. So he says here, it's called neocolonialism. It says, the prerequisite of a correct and global strategy to defeat neocolonialism is the ability to discover and expose the way in which a state becomes neocolonialist. For although a neocolonialist state enjoys only sham independence, it is to all outward appearances independent. And therefore, the very roots of neocolonialism must be traced back to the struggle for independence in a colonial territory. If the liberation movement is firmly established, the colonial power will invariably resort to a containment policy in order to stop any further progress and to deaden its impact. To achieve this objective, the colonial power uses its arsenal of alliances, its network of military bases, economic devices such as corruption, sabotage, and blackmail, and equally insidious, the psychological weapon of propaganda with a view of impressing on the masses a number of imperialist dogmas, right? So he listed 4 imperialist dogmas, but I'm going to give you 3. And these 3 that I'm going to give you are essentially the ones that Barack Obama mentioned in his speech that he gave Nelson Mandela Day. So the first, he wrote that Western democracy and the parliamentary system are the only valid ways of governing, that they constitute the only worthwhile model for the training of an indigenous elite by the colonial power. So that's the first one, right? That first neocolonialist dogma, like you have to be democratic, even though they themselves are not democratic. John Henry Clark used to say at the time when they were talking about democracy back in Greek, 80% of the population was enslaved. We know that on the continent, specifically the Igbo people, the most democratic people probably on the continent, if you read their history. But there's a unity that flows throughout Africa, but the Europeans came and destroyed that system of democracy so they can implement their system of democracy, which is essentially slavery. Right? So the second point that he mentioned, he says that capitalism, free enterprise, free competition, etc., are the only economic systems capable of promoting development, that the Western powers have mastered the liberal capitalist technique perfectly, that the colonial territory should become an economic satellite in its own interests, that there is no reason to put an end to the policy of cooperation pursued during the colonial regime, and that any attempt to break away would be dangerous since the colonial power is always ready to give aid, right? So that was the second one. And the third one that I'll read here is that, I don't even know if I want to read this one, so I'm gonna keep moving. I'm not gonna read that third one. But I wanted to give y'all that. Continentalism is essentially, if you guys are familiar with the brother Obadeli Cambone, he talks a lot about this idea of a lot of Africans on the continent have, when they say Pan-Africanism, they're not talking about African people in terms of race. They are literally confining their Pan-Africanism to the continent. So anybody who's on the continent, whether you are the child of an invader, a settler, it does not matter. You are considered African from that perspective. And that's kind of like what flourishes on the continent. So you see people like, if you look at the great Zeke, Nnamdi Ezekwe, he wrote an essay on Pan-Africanism in 1962, and he states very clearly in his essay that he does not believe in racial chauvinism. So when he's talking about Pan-Africanism, he is not talking about it from a race or a race-first perspective. You see that type of confusion with a lot of the continental leaders or that independence generation who came here to the West to be educated, and then they went back to the continent to lead revolutions. You see it with Kwame Nkrumah, where with his confusion, he thought that he could get out of bed with the British and then jump into the bed with the Americans, when the Americans, white people in general, are always going to be race first. They'll do something that works in their own interest, but they'll never do anything that goes against the interests of their collective. So it was to the interest of the United States to get in bed with Ghana. It wasn't to the interest of them to get in bed to the point where Ghana would be strengthened and develop and could stand on its own too economically, right? So they purposefully undermined the development of Ghana economically, because it's not in the interest of any white nation to help us, and that's something that we have to understand. This fourth point here is Abrahamism or anti-Africanism, and essentially I kind of wrap up the three global religions who see the God as Abraham, I guess, as their God that they pray to. They've essentially engaged in what they refer to as a holy war against all non-believers in that system. So if you look through all of their documents, meaning their historical books or religious books, they're very clear, whether it's the Jews, the Muslims, or the Christians, that infidels, non-believers, their stuff can be taken, they can be enslaved, yada, yada, yada. Like it's very clear. The last part is just Eurocentrism. And I wanted to break that down into, like economic organization, political organization, and social organization. A lot of people, we were talking about this before lecture started, a lot of folks believe that they can, take flight from capitalism and run to socialism, and that's going to save them. When, Marx himself was was very vested in European imperialism. If you read any of the things that he wrote. So one of the things I try to do to alleviate the confusion around economics is this. I always give people the definition of economics, right? Economics is the optimal allocation of resources under conditions of scarcity, right? So it deals with the allocation. It doesn't deal with how the resources are obtained. The resources are obtained by imperialists essentially through strong arm, through murder, through rape, through yada, yada, yada. We good? All right, cool. Let me just get into this. So today, y'all mind if I take a sip of water? Hold that mind? All right.
Take a sip.
Take a sip.
Hydrate. Drink more water, guys.
Somebody had mentioned on Twitter that Dr. Amos Wilson used to be giving like 3 or 4 hour lectures and never take a sip of water. so I want to make sure I stay hydrated. But all right, so Nigeria today, the giant of Africa. Nigeria is currently the 7th most populous country in the world. It's projected to surpass the United States by 2050 and be the 3rd largest nation globally. So when we look at Nigeria's exploding population, the World Health Report is concerned. You see, our boy Bill Gates there with the president of Nigeria, President Buhari. Bill Gates is very concerned about the exploding population of African people. So wherever African people are, you will find Bill Gates and his foundation there giving out money to try to curtail the growth of African people, because that's a significant problem. But one of the things that they identified was the cultural values of African people aid in their growth. So in order to stop their growth, of course, the Europeans says, well, then we're going to have to change their cultural values, right? So this whole, man and a woman thing, y'all need to kind of like get that together and get more with the man-man thing or woman-woman thing. It's very important for women to be educated liberally so that they can come and work in the economy, because it shows that the more education that a woman gets, if she is working within the white capitalist economy, she's less likely to have children. And the third component that they're doing all over Africa is economically castrating African men. The African economy is completely under the control of foreign powers, whether it be Russian, Chinese, Israeli, American. There is no African nation that controls its own economy, and as a result of that, African men are the most unemployed, and I guess this is globally. Wherever you look at across the globe, African men are unemployed, and that's because you have to economically castrate the man so that you can make him a piranha or a pariah in society, to the point that his woman doesn't even want him because he can't provide and things like that. So keep it moving, right? So if we look at the trends in Nigeria today, the average age of a Nigerian right now is 18 years old. 60% of the population is less than 25 years old. Nigeria is growing at a rate of 2.6%. Again, this is very important because if we look from a global perspective, Africa in general is growing at a rate of 2.5%. But if we look at Europe, Europeans aren't growing at all. They aren't even reproducing themselves. You know, they are literally slowly making their way off the planet. So, you know, they are very concerned about that. They are very concerned with the darkening of their populations. So all across Europe, you see significant white nationalist movements that are coming up, and, you know, you see them right here in our own country. Like, I think like once a week or maybe once a month, we got a march somewhere in America where white nationalists are marching that this is a white country, and any brown and black people basically need to get up out of here. So unemployment in Nigeria is at 18.8%. This picture that I have right here is back in 2014 at Abuja, the national stadium. The government hosted what are those things called? Those job things you go to when you need a job? I forgot what they call it.
Job fair.
Damn. Damn. So the government hosted a job fair for government employment. And so many people showed up that it was a stampede. At least 7 people were killed. So, like, that's the reality of things right now in Nigeria, right? So Nigeria, earlier this year, I think this was in June of 2018, displaced India as the nation with the most people in poverty across the globe. So if we look at global headlines, this happened last year. You see a lot of Nigerians fleeing Nigeria, and these are essentially what you refer to as economic immigrants. People are leaving because there are no economic opportunities where they are. It's just like the Europeans who came and settled in all the places that they went to settle. They were economic immigrants. They came to America, and they went to South Africa and other places because shit was bad in Europe. it was real bad, so they needed opportunity. It's just like when our family left the South and went to the North. We left the South and went to the North to go to the factories because we needed some type of like economic opportunity. So when we had the great migration here in America, black people who were forcefully enslaved here migrated to the northern parts, and when we got to the north, we were met with all types of vitriol and hate and murder and hanging. It was vicious. But right now, Nigerians are fleeing Nigeria by like the thousands. So this happened last year. 26 Nigerian women drowned trying to make it across the Mediterranean. And what's very sad is when these women are getting to Europe, they are essentially forced into prostitution to stay there. In fact, if you're a black woman walking in Europe, it's almost assumed that you are like a prostitute. So if you're in Italy, I don't know how the Italian guys say it, is it Bella, whatever they say, like, it's assumed that if you are a black woman in Europe, that you are there as a prostitute. Again, in Italy, these are more headlines. This happened, I think, last week. And one thing that I find very, very interesting about Nigerians, and I guess it almost speaks to like their consciousnness, maybe this isn't even specific to Nigerians, maybe this is continental Africans in general. So there's a bit of a generalization here. But it's the denial of race, that racism isn't the issue that I'm dealing with. So this sister got busted in her face with an egg in Italy. And she writes in the article, or she quotes the article, she says, "I don't want to play the sexism or the racism card. You know, maybe they just bust me in the face and call me a nigger because I had a scarf on." You know, like, so, and, you know, this is a brother who was beaten to death in Italy, and which clearly labeled like as a racist attack. That happened last year. This happened in India. I don't know if y'all might have saw this on social media.
Yeah,
this brother right here got beat by an entire mall. This brother was in the mall in New Delhi. These two are brothers. And earlier that week, an Indian had died, so the local community blamed the migrant population because they said Nigerians are selling drugs, and that's how the Indian dude died. So they just found a random Nigerian and beat him to like within an inch of his life. So you can actually go online and find it. But I found it funny that as I was watching it, his brother says, you know, I don't know if it's got anything to do with skin color. Like you see the caption right there. You know what I mean? He almost beat to his death. So, and again, this is just not India. China and India. China actually used to have a little Africa. It's almost non-existent now because they are running them up out of there. But this is a brother. This brother was actually Congolese. The Congolese people are basically right next to Nigeria, like a little bit south on the bend. This brother got beaten to death in India, again in New Delhi, just for essentially being black. And again, in America, this brother is a Congolese brother. One of the things I always notice whenever, you know, the immigrant population believes in this, you know, this ideal immigrant. Like one of the things they're putting on the news is, oh, this brother, he's of Cameroonian descent. He's an aeronautic engineer, you know, as if being an engineer or being highly educated is going to stop racism, white supremacy from attacking you. But this was the picture that they put online. And we saw what happened to the young sister, Nia Wilson, who was essentially had her throat slashed just for being a black woman. So she isn't Nigerian. I'm just saying that in America, it doesn't matter. Because once you come to America, that whole ethnic identity or ethnic chauvinism, it don't matter. Like, you know, Dr. Clark used to say, when the students were arguing in his class of what, I'm from the Caribbean, I'm from Africa, I'm from America, he said, y'all all go out there in the middle of Broadway and all y'all try to catch a cab. And he said, that cab driver is a better Pan-Africanist than all of y'all. And that's essentially what it is, because this is, once you land here in America, it's not about, I'm Caribbean, that stuff that don't matter, go right out the door. So population trends abroad. The reason why I'm focused on America here, because when it comes to the African diaspora, the movement in terms of destination is two places. You're either going to the UK or you're coming to America or you're going to Canada. To Canada, you're going to get a lot of Caribbean people migrating up to Canada. So you'll have a Jamaican diaspora in Canada. You'll have a Haitian diaspora in Canada. In the UK, again, you get a lot of island people going over to the UK. But right now, they are, you know, it's very serious over there. Like, they're not feeling the whole immigration because, like I said, they're dying out. So, you know, black people are scaring them. But I'm really focused on America, right? So if we look at America, Nigeria represents the largest immigrant population coming to America from sub-Saharan Africa. So I was talking to the brother, and he mentioned like this emerging Nigerian American identity, and that speaks to the fact that Nigeria is basically America's new ideal immigrant, right? They're the most educated group of U.S. immigrants. The caveat to the fact that they are the most educated U.S. immigrant is that they have zero historical consciousness, especially the immigrant population. And what I mean by that is the study of history was removed from Nigerian schools in 1982. So you have an entire generation who was essentially went through school without understanding any, you know, sense of history, their own or others. So I wanted to speak to the impact, right, on the demographic changes, what they're going to have essentially on Pan-African consciousness, right? So I'm basically saying here that due to the lack of historical consciousness that we see in a lot of the folks emigrating here, 3 points of concern or just observation. The first is that a lot of these folks have no concept of Pan-African solidarity or identity. The second thing is they are accepting of the current world order. Like, they're not coming here looking to overthrow white supremacy. They are essentially looking to integrate, you know, with the current reality here. And the third point is, again, I mentioned earlier that we have a lot of economic immigrants. So these folks are solely concerned with earning a living. They're not coming in here trying to get involved with, you know, the black American troublemaker. And we see that the, you know, the Hollywood propaganda arm is very busy in making sure that black Americans are perceived as like the troublemakers, and that when immigrants come here, you need to stay away from them because they got what they got because they're troublemakers. So when they come here, they're not concerned with getting in trouble, fighting the power, none of that stuff. They are only concerned with making a living because, like I said, they're coming from cases of extreme want and poverty. This was put out by the World Bank earlier this year, April of 2018. Nigeria top remittances to sub-Saharan Africa this year. So Nigerians living here in America sent $22 billion back to Nigeria last year. You know what I mean? So this is essentially what they're coming here for. You know, if you look at places like Haiti, one person that's employed is taking care of 17 other people. So if you think about the immigrant population that's coming here from Nigeria, Haiti, it doesn't really matter. When they come here, they're taking care of significant people back home. They're sending money back home. And some of them are not. Like after you're here for a generation or two, you kind of like, that attachment is no longer there, and you're not really necessarily concerned with looking out for anybody because you are now, you've taken on this new American identity. All right, so, I wanted to be fair here. So I'm essentially saying that Pan-African consciousness is at an all-time low across the board, and it's at an all-time low because historical consciousness is at an all-time low across the board, right? So if we look historically at the diaspora, specifically here in America, Black Americans have always had this innate race or Pan-African consciousness, right? So this is an excerpt right here from Dr. Tyreen Wright from her book, The Making of a Pan-Africanist on Booker T. Washington. And what she's essentially saying is that in the last year of Booker T. Washington's life, the U.S. had just finished building the Panama Canal, and they used a lot of immigrant labor to do it. And they tried to pass a bill called the African Exclusion Act, where essentially the U.S. would systematically exclude any and all persons of African or the black race from the U.S. hereafter and place them in the same category as criminals or undesirables attempting to enter into the country. So Booker T. Washington was like, hell nah, we ain't doing that, because as Pan-Africanists, we understand that we can't operate in isolation, so we just can't operate as Black Americans. We know that there needs to be considerable intercourse, economic, intellectual, between us and the rest of the diaspora and the continent in order for this thing to work. So we wasn't with, keeping them out. So Booker T. Washington, in the last year of his life, used a considerable amount of his political capital to ensure that folks from Haiti, from Jamaica, from the islands could come here to America, because we saw it as something that was important. Another one, W.E.B. Du Bois in 1897 wrote his essay, The Conservation of Races. And in this essay, he talks about the duty of Black Americans to the race globally. So he says, the advance guard of the Negro people, the 8 million people of Negro blood in the United States of America, must soon come to realize that if they are to take their just place in the van of Pan-Negroism, he didn't say Pan-Africanism, he said Pan-Negroism, so there's no confusion. He said that their destiny is not absorption by white Americans. He said that if in America is to be proven for the first time in the modern world that not only Negroes are capable of evolving individual men like Toussaint the Savior, but are a nation stored with wonderful possibilities of culture, then their destiny is not a servile imitation of Anglo-Saxon culture, but a stalwart originality which shall unswervingly follow Negro ideals. He's basically saying sometimes Du Bois can be so confused and so clear at the same time. So you gotta read them. Like when we dealing with history, sometimes some personalities we like and some we don't like, but you have to read them because some of their contributions are necessary. And last but not least, this quote right here is from the brother Antonio Furman. You may know him if you're from Haiti. He's a Pan-Africanist in the 19th century from Haiti, also an anthropologist and a political person. And he wrote this about Haiti. The brother said, no people or individual for that matter can live, progress, and move up the ladder of civilization if it does not have a goal and ideal that shepherds it through all the all the peripeties of its existence. He says, for Haiti, that ideal is that of a small nation striving with a sublime courage to rehabilitate an entire race. This is an enterprise so noble, so worthy that each person who participates in it may be considered an apostle. Right? So he sounds a lot like Garvey. If y'all read, Race First or Philosophies and Opinions, Garvey, he took his work almost like an apostle. You know what I mean? He had a very significant flair or ethos of, I guess, Christianity undergirding Garveyism. But I put this here just to say that we've lost our way, because right now there is a global African refugee crisis. Right? So if we look at what's happening with our African people down in Haiti, they're going over into the Dominican Republic. Why? Because they are economic immigrants and they're trying to find work because the global powers of white supremacy has so suppressed and recolonized that nation that the people there are really in a point of almost starvation. But I just came from Haiti. That's why I'm rocking this shirt right here. I was in Jacmel, Haiti for 8 days, and the resilience and spirit of the people in Haiti is so beautiful. I'm thinking about making an annual pilgrimage. But people in Haiti going into the Dominican Republic, their neighbor, to try and essentially find employment, are being lynched. Being lynched. Like it's that severe, right? So I just wanted to speak to that. And if we look at Black America today, I mean, it's kind of like self-explanatory. In Black America, there is a growing sense of xenophobia and ethnic chauvinism. Again, I started off talking about the diaspora wars. Black people are in a state of panic. And I say that we're in a state of panic because many of us are waking up from the dream. Obama was that final shot of Novocaine into our veins, but now it is significantly wearing off. And as a result of it wearing off, people are waking up and they are feeling very disillusioned with the myth of Black progress, right? The Brookings Institute put out a paper earlier this year saying that Black America today is in a worse position economically than where we were 50 years ago. So there's severe economic anxiety because the world globally is undergoing an economic restructuring where touch labor, which Carter G. Woodson told us back in 1930 that we were moving towards automation, so the Black man either better get it together or face extermination. A lot of us are starting to see that reality today, and we don't like what we're seeing coming down the pike. So there's severe economic anxiety. Like, we are afraid that we are not going to be able to feed our children, and that's a reality because that's what's coming to us. So now, when we're seeing people coming from these other places, and they come in here and getting jobs, and you got Trevor Noah on TV, and you got this African here and this African here, Black Americans like, hold up, what about me? I am a Black American descendant of slaves. You know, we trying to like carve out this new identity. You know, no, I'm not African. I stay away from that whole Africa thing. And that Pan-Africanism shit is dead. You know what I mean? They're like, I'm just trying to get some bread. I'm trying to eat. So that's kind of like where we at today with it. So again, we're in a state of panic. So I just wanted to be fair. But again, it's just not us. It's African people in general, right? So this, the whole, you guys familiar with the Ghana Must Go campaign? Who's familiar with the Ghana Must Go campaign? All right, cool. So back in 1983, when Nigeria at the time was flourishing throughout the 70s because of its oil boom, right? When the OPEC people were acting funny with oil, y'all remember when America had the oil drought like back in the 70s and OPEC was kind of like flossing their muscle? But the Europeans was like, all right, cool, we'll go to Nigeria. So Nigeria got fat, like they was eating good, but you know, that shit crashed in the early 80s. But during that period, over 2 million Ghanaians came into Nigeria looking for work. You know, just menial jobs. But when the market crashed in '83, Nigerians wasn't having it. They was like, y'all Ghanaian niggas. That's what I'm saying. Y'all Ghanaians, y'all got to get up out of here. So in 1983, they forcefully evicted or deported up to 1 million Ghanaians. So y'all should go check it out. It's called the Ghana Must Go thing. So I'm saying that to say that, you know, ethnic chauvinism and xenophobia is not something that Black Americans have a monopoly on. But the reality is it's all rooted in ignorance. So if you don't have an understanding of your identity and your connection to other African populations, it's very easy to get caught up in ethnic chauvinism. It's very easy to get caught up in xenophobia. And you look at you know, immigrants as somebody who's other than you and somebody who's taking from you. You know, these little bit of crumbs that master is throwing me off the table, now I got to share them with you. So it's easy to get caught in that type of mind state if you don't have the right type of consciousness, right? So that leads me to the 3 key takeaways from today's lecture. So the first one that I want y'all to understand is that Nigerianism is not unique to Nigerians. I think that I've already kind of like made that point. But I'm trying to like drive it here at home. I want you to understand that there's Black Americanism, there's Jamaicanism, there's Haitianism. It's essentially the idea that my identity is tied to the people who either enslaved me or colonized me. Peace, peace, peace. All right. It's essentially the idea that of our identities being captured and held ransom by this very small moment in history. You know, Dr. Asante used to say, if we look at the Mayafa or slavery enslavement, that's a footnote in our history as a people. That's a very small, a small blip in time, but that small blip in time has come to be what we as a people define ourselves by, and it shouldn't be that way. So that's the first point I want you to walk away with. The second point I want you to walk away with, and I want y'all to hear this clearly, Europeans did not colonize countries. They colonized people They created countries to facilitate the colonization process. Does that make sense to y'all? I'm going to say that one more time. Europeans did not colonize countries. They colonized people. They created countries to facilitate the colonization process. All right? So my third point that I have, and this is the longest of the three, is there were two types of political state formations that arose as a direct result of European expansionism. The first is the African colonial state. The second is the African nation state. The African colonial state is a market entity. It serves as a market instrument for white economic imperialism, right? The African nation state is a revolutionary republic meant to facilitate the overthrow of white hegemonic rule. Do we have any examples of African nation states? There's only one. Everybody should be saying it. Did somebody say it? Did you say it?
Haiti.
Can you say it louder?
Haiti.
All right, long live Haiti. long live the revolution. Haiti is the only African nation state that was developed as a direct attempt to overthrow the white hegemonic rule of the French, the Spanish, and who was the third European nation?
British.
British. How can I forget the British? I'm talking about Nigerians, so I can't forget the British. So the point I want you to walk away with is, remember, the average age in Nigeria is 18 years old. 60% of the population is under the age of 25. So it's important that we impress upon them the importance of dismantling the one and building the other. So dismantling this Nigerian identity, this Nigerian ethos where you are attached to the colonial state, which only serves to facilitate your continued oppression, and working collectively as African people across the globe to develop either the nation state or nation states capable of protecting us all. Because Garvey used to say that a strong man is strong anywhere, right? Back in the day, they used to say you don't have a Chinaman's chance in China, meaning that the Chinese can go anywhere on this earth and they get their ass whipped because they ain't got no homeland to protect them. You can't say that today. But you look at the African, you look at us, in India, getting our ass beat all across the mall. They got us in the Soul Train line, walking down the mall and getting beat with trash cans. You got little kids, everything. They be beating us. Nigeria wasn't able to say, I'm going to issue a statement that if India doesn't apologize and give us $10 million today, we're going to drop bombs on y'all. But let that would have been a Chinese person that happened to. China would have been at their back door like, what's up? You know what I mean? Because a strong man is strong anywhere. You can hold yourself down anywhere. Until Africa is redeemed, none of us will be able to hold ourselves down independently. So we have to break away from this individual identity, this micro-nationalist identity that a lot of us are holding on to. And I'm going to tell you why we're holding on to it. Because we like the proximity to power. So we feel like, well, America got power, and I'm a black American. So as long as they got power, I can share in their power. I can kind of stand under their umbrella. So we got this faith that this system is going to continue to exist, no matter how indignant or unrighteous it is. We believe that a system that was built on the enslavement of one people and the genocide of another is going to last. Even when you look throughout history and we see empires fall, and they fall, and they fall. And right now we're in the middle of an empire that's preparing for a fall, and we're standing around like, I'm a black American descendant of slaves, instead of us preparing and coming together to be listen, when this situation falls, I'm not trying to be oppressed by the Indians. I ain't trying to be oppressed by the Chinese. When this situation falls, I'm trying to stand strong on my own. But the only way for me to do that is for us to stand strong together, right? So that's the importance of dismantling that colonial state identity and building up that other identity. That's what African nationalism is all about. All right, so this is going to be the crux of this. This is going to be the meat of it. I think I'm making a good time. All right. We good?
Good.
Y'all need some water? Y'all need a break? All right, cool. All right, cool. So the economic formation. And this one, this is going to be a treat. This is a treat for me because professionally, I'm a CPA. So I work, I examine corporations. I understand corporate entities. So I understand when I'm looking at one. So when I'm reading this history, I'm like, God damn, this is essentially, this is an acquisition, this is a financial consolidation, this is that. I'm like, damn, they ain't hide it from us. What they used to say, if you want to hide something from a nigga, Where you put it? I'm reading it. I'm like, damn, like it's right here. But I guess, but I'll break it down for y'all. So I want to break it down. Maps, geography, and names. The other one is British commercial dominance. If I have time, because I'm going to try to stop here by 4:40 so we can have a Q&A. If I have time, I'll do the Islamic slave trade. But if not, maybe one of y'all can ask me a question during the Q&A, and I'll speak to the myth of the warring tribes, the one that they tell us about all the time, that Africa got enslaved because it was tribes fighting each other and tribes enslaving each other. That is a whole myth and a lie, right. And it is miscontextualized. And if you don't know that, then you'll continue to operate from confusion, thinking that, oh, Africans enslaved me, I ain't got nothing. Like, I'm gonna break it down for you, all right? If I have time. All right, so this is a treat for you, brother, all right? You were talking about migrations earlier, right? So Baba, master teacher, Dr. Asa Hilliard, he says, every West African is an East African who moved or migrated, right? So if we look at the history of continental migrations, there are two types. There's voluntary, that arise from natural pressures, and there are involuntary, that involve from unnatural pressures. So when we look at the natural pressures, population growth, we growing, we got to move. People move, why? Because we survive off the land. The land, can only handle but so much per acre, per square foot. So as we grow as a people, our borders expand, so we move. Other natural pressure, famine. The floods ain't come, the harvest ain't come. We gotta move to find food or we die. It's a natural thing, natural part of life. Disease. We know that diseases are natural. I mean, is it natural if you're in a state of disease? I don't know, that's debatable. But there are some diseases that arise through nature and they cause people to flee, to go look for greener pastures. Last part is disasters. Floods, fires, storms. These things force people to leave and look for refuge. What I want to focus on today is the unnatural pressures. So war, famine induced by war. So you're my enemy, I'm going to go burn all your crops, right? Because I'm sieging you. So one of the ways that I siege you is by starving out your population. I wanted to talk about Biafra. I'm not going to be able to talk about it today, but the Igbo people, one of the tools that the state of Nigeria used against them was famine, Until this year, I never even knew about the Nigerian Civil War. Never knew it even existed. First time I heard of it this year. I studied it intently to understand what happened. I saw all the players in it. Like the Rothschilds even got involved. At the point where Biafra, because one of the ways that Nigeria won the war, and I'm dovetailing a little bit, I'm come right back, I promise. One of the ways they won the war is they economically castrated them. So the federal government of Nigeria said, you know what? We're just going to change our dollar. We don't have the Nigerian pound no more. We're moving to the Naira. So what did they do to the people of Biafra? Oh, they had to get rid of all these Nigerian pounds. So what they had to do? They had to sell it to the Bank of Rothschild with pennies on the dollar. So they always winning. They're selling weapons to both sides of the struggle. I'm going to keep going. Disease induced by war. We know biological warfare, right? We know that, right? And last is invasion, right? So invasion, forced migrations. This is the side of the equation we're going to deal with today, all right? All right, so you guys familiar with Dr. Asa Hilliard's chart of major foreign invasions of ancient Kemet? How many people are familiar with this chart? Nobody familiar with this chart? All right. So Baba Asa Hilliard put this chart together in 1988. If you go on YouTube, there's actually a really good presentation where he's breaking this down. Nope. Never let nobody shame you about learning anything from lecturers on YouTube. I see a lot of bourgeois academics poke fun at people from learning on YouTube. Meanwhile, if you're a professor that you're paying $40,000 a year tells you to go to YouTube, look at today's lesson, you a whole sucker. I'm getting it for free. I'm learning from Asa Hilliard. I'm learning from Amos Wilson. I'm learning from, just keep naming them. But that material is out there. And sometimes we don't have to repeat the same things, right? Our generation, our goal should be to institutionalize the ideas that generation developed. They developed these ideas over a 40-year period. I was talking to a brother in Africa, and he was mentioning some stuff, and I'm like, brother, have you ever heard of Frances Cress Welsing? It's like, oh, well, you recreate the will. That already exists. You should read what she wrote and then build from there. But the fact that we ain't reading and we don't have a library and we aren't institutionalizing knowledge, we're doing a whole lot of spinning our wheels. So it's important that we check this out. So he breaks down the invasions that happened in Kemet from about 1750 BC with the Hyksos all the way down to the modern era. He has it all the way down to the year 2000. What was that? Oh yeah, I'll try and talk about that briefly if I can talk about the slavery part. But essentially, who knows who this brother is right here?
Is it Norman?
Yes, who is Norman?
He was the original. Well, they say like one of the original kings of Kemet.
Okay. So, okay.
But I'll let you go ahead.
No, that's perfect. Anybody else want to add to who he was?
He united Lower and Upper Kemet for the first time
Why did he unite them?
to form one kingdom,
Okay.
one nation.
You know anything about him?
Nothing that no one has already said.
All right. So what was that?
Fighting against the Asiatics that are coming across.
What was that? Say that again.
Fighting against the Asiatics that are coming across.
So he unified two people because the Eurasians and the Asiatics were coming across and attacking them. He said, hey, we can't stand alone. We fighting with each other when these people are attacking us from the outside, so we need to stand together as one in order to stand. And we don't stand as one, we don't stand at all. Right? So that's brother, y'all already said it. This is Norma or Paramenes. It's the first Pan-African nationalist. And why do I say that? Because he created a nation. He unified Upper and Lower Kemet, two warring kingdoms, to become one nation. At the time, they were comprised of 42 different ethnic groups. I mean, Nigeria today is about 250 different ethnic groups speaking probably any number of languages. But if you look at the large percent of the population, I think 70% consists of Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, or Hausa Fulani. If you want to, I'll get into the Fulani because if I have to deal with the slave trade, I have to deal with the Fulani. It's impossible to deal with that without dealing with them. But so he basically unified Upper and Lower Kemet. It was comprised of 42 different ethnic groups. With all these different ethnic groups, Igbo, Fan, Congo, Yoruba, they weren't put together arbitrarily by a colonizer. They said, no, we all going to come together as one so that we can stand against who? The Eurasians, the Asiatics that are coming against us.
Kemet, the land of black people.
I like, what did we say that?
The land of black people.
All right, you getting ahead. I'm not even there. All right, we cool? All right, cool. So why is this important? All right, so if we look at the current inhabitants of present-day Nigeria, like I said, these three comprise 70% of the population in modern-day Nigeria. Based on the oral traditions of each of these three ethnic groups, they all trace their origins back to the Nile Valley civilization. Y'all can't see that. All right, where we at? We good?
Sneak peek.
All right, so the sister wrote here, not sister, she ain't my sister, but Flora Shaw, the mother of Nigeria. I call her the mother of Nigeria somewhat condescendingly, but she wrote here in this book because I love the fact that they document everything. I mean, they document everything. But she said, it is accordingly to Egypt that we look for all our earliest information concerning the land of the blacks. And it is to Egypt, and through Egypt to Asia Minor and Arabia, that the blacks themselves trace their oldest traditions. Flora Shaw, mother of Nigeria, she wrote that in Tropical Dependency. You have to read this book because she breaks down so much. Okay, right? So how did Egyptians come to be Nigerians? The answer is the same way Africans came to be Negroes. Both Negro and Nigeria are market terms. I'm going to break down how she gave the name Nigeria and why she gave the name Nigeria, which she didn't create. She just used it for this entity, which was a market entity. But we all know that Negro is a market term, right?
Yes, sir.
We got some Negroes for sale, right? We know that that's a market term, right? But we can't stop calling ourselves niggas because they've been driven into us. Like, that's who we are. We market commodities. But, let's get into it. So, who's this gentleman right here? Not a gentleman. Who's this rat bastard right here? I'm sorry.
He's a terrorist.
He's a terrorist. I agree. But who is he? All right, it's Cecil Rhodes. Y'all know who Cecil Rhodes is?
Yes.
All right. Somebody, the sister back here. No, go ahead. Who's Cecil Rhodes?
No, I was thinking what they say. He Rhodesia. They said it was named after him because he was one of the original people.
Yeah. I was reading a story earlier this year. A young brother from Temple, from North Philly, did well at Temple. Yes, did well at Temple, and he got a scholarship to go study in Europe. You know what scholarship he got? He got a Rhodes Scholar. And I thought to myself, it's very sad when we don't understand our history, because a Jew would never accept a scholarship in the name of Hitler. but we'll accept a Rhodes Scholar because we don't know. I mean, again, we come from a point of starvation. So, it is what it is. But this is what he had to say. He said, we must find new lands from which we can easily obtain raw materials and at the same time exploit the cheap slave labor that is available from the natives of the colonies. The colonies would also provide a dumping ground for the surplus goods produced in our factories, right? So Nigeria, I'm going to explain to you how Nigeria is a commodity market and a Negro is a market commodity, right? So before I start talking about commodities, it wouldn't be fair if I didn't explain to y'all what a commodity is, right? So a commodity, in short, is something that's highly indistinguishable. One is indistinguishable from the other, right? It's highly liquid, meaning you can trade it. It's like a stock. If I buy a stock that's publicly traded, like I can trade it anywhere. So if I got some Negroes for sale, I can take them right down to Market Street, or I can take them to Wall Street or Exchange Street, right? Hop right off the port and sell my niggas. I can post up a sign for healthy Negroes for sale, right? Because these are market commodities. They're highly liquid. They can be sold anywhere, right? And these people made the entire world a slave market. You can sell them the sub-Saharan slave trade. You can sell them in Arabia. Transatlantic slave trade. You can sell them in America. A lot of us don't even know that it was a trade that went from West Africa up to Spain when the Moors had Spain. Why? Because the Moors were facilitating a trade where they were capturing pagans down in Paganville, people who weren't Muslims or Christians, and they were bringing them up to Spain. In fact, the first Europeans to bring enslaved Africans up to Spain, one of the people that they captured was a black Moor. And he said, hey man, they knew he was a noble because the way he was dressed, he spoke a little bit of Arabic. So he said, hey man, if y'all let me go, I'm somebody. Me and those two little kids right there, we somebody. We can give you a ransom. So they said, okay, we Europeans, we want more money. So they took him back down to West Africa, and he was true to his word. So in exchange for him, he gave 10 Africans. Y'all can take them. And for those two little kids, y'all take them as well. Those are the first, when the first Africans that the Portuguese brought out of Africa after they took over the trade from the Moors, from the black Muslims. After they took over the trade from them, they were people who were non-Christians, were pagans, were infidels. So it was okay to make war on them. All right, let me get back to commoditization. So what is commoditization? Commoditization refers to the process of making something into a commodity. A commodity is a fundamental good used in commerce that is interchangeable with other commodities of the same type. Commoditization removes the individual, unique characteristics and brand identity so that product becomes interchangeable with other products of the same type. So what does that mean? When you come here, I'm fine, I'm Wolof, I'm Yoruba, I'm Igbo. Like, no, you Negro, right? You've been commoditized. So when you come here to America, that distinguished identity and culture and difference that you had don't even matter no more, because now you are a market product, right? So y'all get the point, right?
Yes, sir.
I don't got to drive that home. All right, cool. So pre-scramble for Africa. This is before the Europeans started the scramble for Africa in earnest. Again, the Portuguese and Spanish, British, the Dutch, people from Holland. Aren't the Dutch from Holland?
Yes, yeah, Holland, Netherlands. Yes.
Yeah, there's another. Okay. So their influence was stuck basically around like the coast of Africa. So this is a pre-scramble map. So if you look here, they broke down the map basically by commodities. So right here you have pepper coast or grain coast, gold coast, which, when they got their independence, they changed the name to Ghana. Slave coast or Benin, right? Negro land, just Negro land, right? So did I break that down? Oh, so this was before the scramble. Now, when the scramble occurred and they penetrated the continent, it became necessary for them to distinguish the different, what companies own what people, what land, what resources. So, in marketing, that's called branding, right? So, Flora Shaw is credited with coining the name Nigeria in 1897. In 1897, the scramble for Africa is already full thrust ahead. So this is an article that she wrote. She writes, The name Nigeria, applying to no other portion of Africa, may without offense to any neighbors be accepted as coextensive with the territories over which the Royal Niger Company has extended British influence, and may serve to differentiate them equally from the British colonies of Lagos and the Niger Protectorate of the coast, and from the French territories of Upper Niger. So one thing that you'll see from Scramble for Africa is that the French, the British, and the Germans were really warring with one another. So this purple right here, this is all French colonies. The brown, these are all British colonies. So this Nigeria is a British colony surrounded by French colonies, but they carved it out for themselves with their muscle or whatever. So again, she used the name to brand them so that she could distinguish them from the other markets around them. She didn't create the name Nigeria. The name Nigeria is first used in 1788. It's used in a book called Rites, Ceremonies, and Customs of the Whole World. Whoever wrote this book, something Hurd, or William Hurd, whatever his name is, the title of this section, he says, the religion of the inhabitants of Nigritia, or Nigeria. This is the first time the term Nigeria is used, in 1788. Remember, they saying that she coined it in 1897. No, she just used it as an identifier for a market to distinguish it from other markets that were around it. It is a market term. You have to understand that. 1721, this was the most popular dictionary in London in 1721. This is the Universal Etymological English Dictionary. If you look at the word Negro in this dictionary, again, another market term, what does it say? One born in Nigritia, in Africa, or of Niger, a black, a Niger, it says N-I-G-E-R, so I don't know if they're pronouncing it in Niger, but it says a Niger, a black Moor, or a black slave. That's what a Negro meant in 1721 in the most popular dictionary in London. Okay? So the term Negro is what's known as a demonym, right? I just learned this word 2 days ago, so don't feel bad because I'm going to share it with y'all the same way that I found it. A demonym is a word that describes where people come from. Land of black people, right? A word that describes where people come from. So this is a direct quote from this website, this geography site. It says, history students should remember that country names, as well as ways of referring to their inhabitants, have changed frequently throughout history. And what we call people today, from, for example, Uganda, is not what they would have been called 300 years ago when Uganda didn't exist as a British protectorate. So I'm just making a point that the names change. Whoever conquers you gives you a name. I have dominion over you, so I'm going to name you, right? Naming, Dr. Mazama, when she gives her lecture, naming the first act of African agency, which is why I named myself Omowale, a Yoruba name, which means the child who has come home. So when I started to come into my African consciousness, I knew that naming was important. Omowale, a name given to Malcolm X by the students, the Nigerian students, back in the 60s. When I read the autobiography that was of Malcolm X, that was something that spoke to me, that name. So when I saw Dr. Mazama give that lecture, naming the first act of African agency to show that you have dominion over yourself, I took that name, Omowale. I took the last name Africa because Dr. John Henry Clark says a name needs to attach you to land. It needs to mean something. So when I looked at my government name, like, I ain't gonna put it here because this is on social media, and then, you know, Malcolm X used to start off his lectures with friends, enemies, so I know that there's some enemies watching, so I ain't about to give y'all my government. But I looked at my government, and it means like a small person from some land over in Scotland. I'm like, damn, but that ain't me. I ain't Scottish. You know, I'm not confused, but that's neither here nor there. Let me keep it moving. So this is one of the pre-colonial maps. This map, the Ethiopian Ocean, the Nigritarium region. So they're showing West Africa, right? This is a pre-colonial map. And if you want, I can give you details where you can find this. Other names for land of black people from A to Z, from Azania to Zanj. This is was a great article that I found. A lot of the folks down in South Africa, they're very inspired by the struggle here in America as well. In fact, they often try to keep Black Americans, especially the rowdy ones, from going down to South Africa because they don't want us down there starting no trouble. Yeah, they do a good job. You'll see what they did to Killmonger. They made Killmonger an insane sociopath, and that's the representation of Black Americans. Don't listen to those niggas because they ain't nothing but trouble. So when African immigrants come here, they know good and well stay away from goddamn Black Americans because they some trouble. But so Azanya to Zanj, again, the Arab slave trade. You look at languages like Swahili, which is a slave trading language. If you look all down here, Zanj comes from Arabic Zang, meaning land of blacks, right? So Tanzania, Zanzibar, anywhere you see that Zan or that Zanj, like that is referring to black people. You gotta understand that, right? So I just got a few more maps here to show y'all. This is where it said Negro land before. Now it says Ethiopia. So are we Ethiopians? And Guinea, this is another name that means black people. This is the map of Nigritia and Guinea. So remember when Flora Shaw said the lands around the Royal Niger territories are often referred to as Sudan? Yeah. So are we Sudanese? Are we Nigerian? What are we? What are these terms? What are these names? She gave the names so that they could distinguish the market. We're going to call this Nigeria because there's nothing else in Africa that has this name. So this is how we're going to brand ourselves. This is Nigeria. This is Nigeria. Y'all saw that song? You know they banned that song in Nigeria, right? All right. So, now Sudan is up here. Now this is Ethiopia and Zanzibar, Mozambique, right? So I'm just breaking it down to you how this naming works, how our identity is commoditized and colonized. That's why I said we got to start. If you want to deal with the economic formation, you got to deal with how they draw the lines. You got to understand the rules of the game that they set. So now today you calling yourself a black American, what you are simply saying is that I or my ancestors belonged to the children of the British who revolted against their mom and dad, and now they are Americans. So I am a black American because that's who I was owned by. That's micronationalism. That's Nigerianism, rooting your identity based upon who owned you, when that period of our history is so small. All right. So these are just some other terms for land of black people. And if you want, I was going to say, this is a free lecture. We are an organization that tries to serve the people. So I was going to ask if you guys wanted copies of the slides, maybe a $5, $10 donation. I would be happy to give you a copy of the slides, but just to help us out as an organization. Just a small shameless plug. But if you look at these demonyms, Egyptians, Ethiopians, Sudanese, Ghanaians, Negritians, Nigerians, Negroes, these all correlate with places on the map that essentially mean what? You understand that? Right? So when Dr. Asa Hilliard says every West African is an East African who moved, and we understand that they moved because of invasions, we understand that the Abrahamic wars that came into, let me ask you a question. Everybody here has heard that Napoleon went into Egypt and shot off the nose of the Sphinx, right? Mm-hmm. We've all heard that? Yeah. We've all heard that? Yes. Y'all know that that's debated among scholars? Yeah. Y'all know that? Yeah, I know. The reason why it's debated is because when the Muslims conquered Egypt and around, I think it was around the year 1500 or 1300, around the year 1300, they conquered Egypt in 642 AD. But around, they were fully conquered at this point. Around 1300, there was a Muslim sheikh who was there who got so pissed off when he saw the peasants or the indigenous inhabitants of Egypt, when he saw them making offerings to the Sphinx so that the waters could rise of the Nile for their harvest. He was so mad by that pagan worship that he took off the nose. Right? So that's debated among scholars. You can take that. I'm letting you know that it's for debate, but there are pictures that show that the nose was gone before Napoleon even got there. So we run in with that story about Napoleon took it off. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But again, these are just some demonyms, many names, one people. We talking about the same people. Negro land, Nigritia, Ethiopia, Sudan, whatever you want to call it. We literally talking about the same people. Yes, different ethnic groups. Black people, we are separated by what our brothers and sisters on the continent like to call tribe. We are separated by tribe and tongue, but we are one people. We can all trace back to common ancestor. So we spread out and grew, but we are one people. And Europeans, they operate as one group. They don't operate against the interests of the group. I'm going to show you how. Keep going. British commercial dominance. How much more time I got here? Y'all okay? Am I putting y'all to sleep? Is this too long? We going too long? I'm going to finish up here real soon. We might not be able to get into the slave trade portion, but like I said, if y'all ask any questions in Q&A around that, I'll give you some information on that. So the British commercial dominance, I got to keep going back to Cecil Rhodes. He says, Africa is still lying ready for us. It is our duty to take it. It is our duty to seize every opportunity of acquiring more territory, and we should keep this one idea steadily before our eyes, that more territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race, more of the best, the most human, most honorable race the world possesses. Right? So he was very, very clear on what his objectives are. Right? So when the scramble for Africa kicked off in 1880, by 1913 they had fully colonized Africa. And people like to say that Ethiopia has never been colonized. I am researching that claim. Because I saw once, I read something that they said, well, that was a qualified independence. That always intrigued me. What do they mean by qualified independence? Were they Wakanda? You know, it was happening all around them, and they just think, I don't necessarily believe that. But they cooperated. Is that what you're saying? I mean, that may be the case. But like I'm saying, I know that for us during the early 20th century, Ethiopia was a symbol, especially like in the Garvey movement, you know, princes shall come out of Egypt. You know, we were so steeped within the Bible that it meant something to us to fight for Ethiopia. You know, so during the Italian-Ethiopian War, where the Eritreans fought on the sides of the Italians against the Ethiopians, but during that war, Black Americans signed up to go over and fight to protect Ethiopia. But that's neither here nor there. In less than a 33-year period, the Europeans got on one page, and scrambled for Africa, colonized Africa. Right, so they kicked it off. With European entrepreneurs formed companies. Like companies was the method, and this is important. When I'm talking about market commodities and commodity markets, the company was the instrument used to colonize the continent. So we got to understand this, right? So I'm gonna keep breaking it down for you. Hold on, what was in here? The problem was, you know how in capitalism they say competition is a good thing? Yeah. The problem was competition isn't necessarily a good thing when you said it needs to be, for socialism to work right, you said it has to be a homogenous population. Well, for capitalism to operate in its purest form, it needs to be a homogenous population. When you have an opponent, right, that you are trying to colonize, me and you can't be fighting against each other. We can't be competing because we're trying to compete and it's making our business venture unprofitable. Because the Europeans had intense competition, trade wars, and they had to fight military campaigns because the Muslim emirs were deeply entrenched and already controlled the markets. Remember, the Muslims already had a sub-Saharan slave market going across the Sahel region of Africa. They already had a market going from West Africa up to Spain. In fact, it was a Muslim who came here to America in 1311 and traded with the Indo-Americans. So when Spain won the war in 1492, or when the Christians won the war in 1492 against Islam, that's what they always say, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Why? Because the Muslims already had a route to America. You know what I mean? But I don't even know how I got there. I'm motor mouth at this point. But so at this point, I got there because I said the military campaigns. They had to fight against the Muslims because the Muslims, black people were essentially currency on the continent. Not black people who practice the traditional practices of our ancestors. So if you were not Muslim, if you were not Christian, then you were not human, and you were currency. And when Islam conquered Africa, they literally, on an annual basis, would raid into Africa. Let me keep going. But essentially, you can't make money in that type of instability. So I need to put these wars down. I need to stop this slavery thing, this slave raiding thing. And an interesting thing that I want you to know is slavery in America ended here when? 1863, somebody said it?
1865 in the United States.
Well,
Well, they say
the pit.
1865, but we know in Mississippi it wasn't until 2013. So.
Okay, so if we look at 1863, right? Here's an interesting note that we should understand. The Nigerian army was formed in 1863. Why is that important? Because the Nigerian army, if you read Colonel Lugard's documents for who they used to form the army, first of all, they started up with 40 houses. And the reason why they started with houses is because the houses in the north were dispossessed by the Fulanis. So whenever you got a population that's discontent, like the black Americans here in America, if I'm warring with America, then I'm going to try and get that discontent population to be my vanguard. So when you saw socialism trying to penetrate America, they courted black Americans because they knew that we were discontent here. Well, they did the same thing here. They courted the houses because the houses got conquered in northern Nigeria in the early 19th century by Don, whatever his name is, this Muslim dude who launched essentially a jihad. So the way that they won the north is what they started working with the houses. But then when they create, you said, what's his name? Yes. I appreciate you for saying that. So the way that they formed the military in 1863 was they said, we want Muslims. We don't want these pagan tribes because these people are hard to rule over. We want the Muslims because they're already used to the order. They already have an established army of slave raiders. But since we need to do away with slave raiding, these people now become the military. So when you look at Nigeria today, or you look all across the continent today, in the former British protectorates, the British colonies, you see military in place. But what wars are they fighting? They ain't killing no white people. They serve as police to protect the interests of the former colonizer, right? So when they ended the slave raids, now these people became the new military. Same thing here. When they ended slavery here, the slave catcher in America became the police. It's the same thing. Military in Nigeria almost operates like police. So they had to fight significant military campaigns against the slave raiders because they're like, it's impossible for us to make money or to exploit these markets for all this wars going on. So we got to stop it. So they said, what are we going to do? We need to end this competition. Oh, capitalism, we need competition. No. This is a special case. No competition, right? So he says, why should we not form a secret society with but one object? The furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole world under British rule, for the recovery of the United States and for making the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire. What a dream, but yet it is probable, and it is possible. So he said, we got to stop this goddamn competition. So what did they do? This dude, Sir George Goldie, husband to Flora Shaw, the father. Huh?
That's an old boy.
Oh, you know about him?
No, the husband and wife team?
Yes. Husband and wife. The husband of Flora Shaw. Remember, white women birthed white supremacy.
Right.
They were okay with white supremacy. They just said, we just want a piece of the pie.
Intersectionality.
We just want some of the power. We don't want, we okay. We don't give them niggas the power. Give us the power. We can work with you to uphold the situation, okay? Like, we birthed this thing. Come on now. So George Tallman. So I got a couple slides of reading, and I'm bringing this thing to an end. But like I said, I really did prepare a full course meal. And as I'm going through this, I'm hoping y'all understanding why I decided to only focus on economic formation. Because if I would have tried to go into amalgamation and independence and the Civil War, I would have had y'all here for 12 hours. You know, and I've been so just ingrained in the culture and study of Nigerian history that I didn't realize how much information that I had built up. So, you know, the exercise to try to distill and consolidate, it was just too much, which is why I just decided to focus on economics today. And plus, economics is my wheelhouse, and I feel very comfortable there. But, so the Royal Niger Company was a product of the economic and political conditions existing in the Niger Delta in the second half of the 19th century. After the discovery of the mouths of the Niger in 1830, the upriver trade had been organized by MacGregor Lord. He carried on by him and his agents till his death in 1861. When his vigorous personality was removed, the trade languished for a brief season until 1864, when the West African Company was formed. Please keep in mind, this West African company is what's going to become what is Nigeria today. I want you to understand that Nigeria is a market entity. Remember when I said that, the key takeaway, there were two types of nation-state formations that came out of European expansionism. The colonial state and the revolutionary nation-state. Haiti, example of the latter. Nigeria, an example of the former. The colonial state is just an outgrowth of the colonial company. We got to understand that. So it says, the West African Company was formed. Several other firms followed, notably Miller Brothers in 1868, and for a decade, competition raged fiercely along the creeks and the beaches of the Niger Delta. As a result, trade profits were reduced to a minimum, and affairs were critical until the organizing genius of Sir George Tubman Goldie was applied to the problem. He said the solution was obvious. Now, let me tell you how this works. When I read George Tubman talking about amalgamation, and I said to myself, man, that sounds like a financial consolidation. Because in accounting today, that's what we refer to it as. But again, in the 20th century, 19th century, they use different and old and unuseful words. But an amalgamation is a financial consolidation. So he says, so George Tubman would apply to the problem. The solution was obviously amalgamation. But the difficulty was to bring this about. So George, by his diplomatic skill and determination, succeeded in 1879 in uniting the competitors into one united African company. The necessity of a monopoly and dealing with rural savages, the African people, the people that we got to fight, is obvious. We need a monopoly if we're going to deal with these people. We can't be competing with each other while we're fighting with them. That don't make no sense. But that's what we're doing. We got white supremacy coming against us, and we're like, I'm a descendant of slave. You're a black immigrant. You need to get the hell out of here. Like, no. How are we fighting with each other and they warring against us? Close ranks. Get rid of that slave identity. Operate under an African or Pan-African identity. It's necessary. You don't get a reemergence of Pan-Africanism or Pan-African consciousness without first setting that identity. All right, let me keep going. It says, where the expenses and risk of trade are high and there is no fixed schedule of prices and no dependable market conditions, trade competition becomes chaos and the traders tend to involve each other in general ruin. Meaning, like, competition is so steep, they call it cutthroat. I don't know if y'all used to hustle back in the day, but cutthroat, you stepping on somebody's dick. Like, competition is rough, it's real out here. You know what I mean? Like, it's real. It's capitalism. It's cutthroat. They're like, we can't be cutthroat. It's like on The Wire when they brought what was his name on The Wire? Jamie Hector. What was his name on The Wire? Omar. No, his name wasn't Omar. What was his name? Marlo. When they brought him to the table, they said, hey, come on, brother, you gotta come join the co-op. We can't get this money with you out here killing. We can't have this war in the street. Come join the co-op. Because that's what happened. The Europeans was killing each other. They said, no. You got to amalgamate. Come join the co-op. We can get this together. This is a crime syndicate. Biggest crime family in the world. Yeah. And so this is how the monopoly was born. He says he wanted to secure a royal charter so that he could essentially operate as a company, but also as the government of the territories that his company acquired. Now, if you look at